Hello, this week's viewer request video comes from Tiffany, and Tiffany writes, I am working on a figure 8 stitch and have my pegs marked correctly. So far, I have mastered the stitch, but I'm having trouble with knowing how exactly to wrap the first peg and how to switch directions to wrap the other way. Is there a chance you could do a short video showing cast on and do a few rows so we can avoid some common mistakes? It would greatly be appreciated if you could. Alright, Tiffany, thank you. Alright, so it sounds like she's using one of the S-shaped looms, but Tiffany, I'm going to show you on this loom, same concept. Of course, when you come to your pegs that you have marked on your S-shaped loom, you skip those. The ones you mark, you ignore that they ever even existed. Now for a few pointers, before you start out, this is just a piece of scrap yarn. Have a piece of yarn, let me cut this, an extra piece of yarn that is long enough to fit in between and that you can pull down and tie. I'll show you why in just a moment. And typically for using a loom of this gauge, I would use 2 strands of worsted weight yarn, but I'm just going to use 1 strand just to show you how to do this. And also another thing you want to do is you want to use a tensioner. And what a tensioner does is it makes sure that your stitches are all even because you're holding this to wrap instead of holding the yarn and wrapping by hand. It also makes it a lot faster to wrap your pegs, which makes your project go faster. This was a crown tube for like the twistable crowns. Twistables. But you can also use just hollow out a Bic pen or anything that has a hard outer shell and just make sure it'll fit in between your pegs. Okay, first we want to start with a slip knot. And I always anchor my yarn. And now you're having questions about wrapping. I'm just going to wrap up to this blue peg. I'm a lefty, so I'm going to hold it like this. Okay. Now what you do, your first peg, you wrap from behind, around, and you go down. That's how you wrap your first peg. And then it's up, over, well down, over. But you said you have the figure 8 stitch down, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that. And now, you do have a choice at this point. When you're on this last peg, you can either take and double wrap it and then go about your way, or you can just loop around just kind of like a U shape and then go about. I prefer to do the U shape, but before I do that, I want to show you something else. Wrap all the way down, and then you take your scrap yarn and place just over top your stitches. And what this is going to do is hold all of your stitches down, and then when you get done, all of this whole first row will be separated from the rest of your project. And that way, if you want to do, there are ways you can finish up the edges so that your cast on and cast off will look exactly the same. And that's nice to have there. And also it helps because I know me, when it comes down a little bit, I'm always wanting to pull and look at it, and you can mess the whole end up by doing that. So with this, you have this and you use this to pull down. Use this to pull down and see where you're at. Okay, so let's get back here. Alright, so we're going to do, well, I'm just going to do it like a U around this last one, and it only has 1 stitch on it. And then you get back to wrapping. And this is one of those stitches where each row will be the exact mirror image of the row below it. Some of these stitches aren't. Okay, now this last peg, I just wrapped it around it. So at this point, if you chose not to double wrap your first peg here, you will have every single peg except for this one will have 2 on it. And if you did that, that's perfectly fine. Okay, and at this point, this is where you take, and this is just your cast on. Take that bottom loop over the top. Now, I'll explain while I'm doing this a little bit more why I skip that peg. When you're doing flat knitting, which is just like one side or in a circle. Lots of times, well, no matter if you're using a single stitch, let's say you're doing a whole project with an E-wrap stitch, you're doing a whole project with a purl stitch or a flat stitch, or there's a bunch of different stitches. If you're using just one singular stitch for your entire project, it will curl from every direction it can curl from. And there's blocking and different things you can do to kind of help. But while you are working on it, I have noticed if that very first peg of every row, which is the peg that the yarn is coming from, so this time it'd be this peg, next time it would be this peg. So the peg the yarn is coming from, if instead of wrapping that one a second time and going, if I just skip that peg, for some reason that seems to help it from, it will still curl some, but it won't curl as bad. And then after, like if it's a blanket, after you wash it a couple times, the edges curling will almost be non-existent. Make sure my lighting's a little good. Okay, so we've got our cast on done. Now I'll do another row, and this is just that string down there. Alright, so like I was saying, if you're skipping, this is the peg the yarn is coming from, so we don't wrap that one. We just go ahead and go down, and we just follow our exact same pattern. And then we wrap this last one. And what I like to do is always take that last one off first, because then I don't have to worry about the whole thing unraveling on me. I'll just do a couple more rows so you can catch the idea of the ends, which the figure 8 stitch like this, it will not curl. You never ever have to worry about that being a problem. So that's why I say skipping these end pegs, well, the first peg of every row, I'll phrase it that way, why that's kind of optional. I do it out of muscle memory, and I like the way it looks a little better, because I mean, you have to be sitting there with a magnifying glass to really see a difference, because it's nothing that anybody would notice, but I notice. That's just because I've done it so much that I like the way that looks better. Okay, so this is another row. This is the peg the yarn is coming from, so I'm skipping it and I'm wrapping the rest. I think maybe I should have got a lighter color yarn as my pull yarn. Okay, we're wrapping around that back peg. I think I should have got a lighter color yarn for that. There we go. But one thing you do want to do is this pull yarn here, you want to make sure it's a color that you can easily tell the difference from the color you're using. So don't just cut a piece of the yarn you're using and use it as your pull yarn. And that's, you can do that. It's not like a big no-no. But if you do that, it can make it harder for you to see these end stitches, which I'll do it down far enough to where you can see what I'm talking about. Alright, now at this point, we've done a couple rows. These stitches aren't going anywhere. You can take your slip knot off, just push it down so that string just isn't in the way, and that's done. And now you can see, after just a couple rows, it's starting to come down. Now what I was talking about with this is when you get done with your project, let me zoom that in so I can just leave it sitting like that. When you're done with your project, which of course I used black on dark brown, so it's kind of hard to see. But that first layer, you can see right there, you can see all those first stitches just very plainly. And that's great because you can separate exactly which one's which. And there is a way, I have a video that shows you how, but there's a way where you can take your crochet hook and kind of crochet all those together. And if you do that, you always want to remember you start on the opposite side, like your extra string from your pull string where you started. You're going to start on the opposite side of that and do what the directions say all the way to the end. That way you can have this one to pull through and lock it. And that will just give it a finished look to the edge, if that's what you're wanting. And it will help with some of the stitches. It will actually make both ends look the exact same. But again, that's up to you. That's just another tip that it's nice to have that in there, so no matter what you decide at the end of it, you'll have that there, and it makes it a lot easier. Like if this would have been a white string instead of a black one, it'll just honestly the first thing I saw from where I was making a scarf. It's a piece of ruffle yarn. But anyway, you got, if that was like a white, these would stand out really, really good. A lot better than they are now. And then you can pick those stitches up. And actually, I've never used a piece of the ruffle yarn to separate that out. And honestly, I really like it because it's so thick that you're not going to be even seeing the rest of the stitches. Like just one little string. It's like, yeah, you got these stitches, but then it can kind of be confusing. Some of the other ones might be standing out too. But this, you see nothing but these stitches right here. Alright, Tiffany. I really hope that helps. I did the cast on. I kind of showed like the end pegs, how you do that, which again, it's your choice. I prefer to, whatever peg the yarn is coming from, I skip when I start the row. And I do all the rest of them, and in the next row, the yarn will be coming from this peg, so I'd skip it and go down. For me, it was just a habit I got into to help the outcome of flat panel items. So it's something I just automatically do on everything now. Thank you so much for requesting this video, and I really do hope it helps. If there's any more questions that you can think of, just let me know. All right, and thank you for watching, and everybody don't forget to like, share, subscribe, comments, I don't know, YouTube, Twitter it, whatever it is you like to do. Thank you.